Oh, I see, that we get a good count.
Yeah, we get in that account and we lose money.
All right, I'll call to order the previously noted meeting of the Oregon Public Records Advisory Council for November 13th, 2019. First of all, I'd like to declare that we do have a quorum of existing members of the Public Records Advisory Council. We have 2 positions vacant, and we have 6 members here present today. Present are Lisa and Liz.
Okay.
Sorry, Liz. Scott Winkles, Rob Bovett, Mark Landauer, Tony Hernandez is on the phone. Is that correct, Tony?
Yes, that's correct.
And Rich Vial, Deputy Secretary of State, as designee for Secretary of State Bev Clarno.
Okay, and Les Zeitz is on the phone as well.
Thank you, Les. Anyone else that I missed that's on the phone? All right.
Ginger will be calling in around 1:30, just so everyone.
Okay. We have a set of previous minutes that have been distributed. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the minutes of the meeting of September 13th. Is that the ones we're adopting? Okay.
And October 1st.
And October 1st. And where are those minutes? Are those posted on the? Yes, those are
distributed.
Okay.
I'll make the motion.
Motion to approve the minutes of the September 13th, 2019 and the October 1st, 2019 meetings. Is there any objection? Without objection, those minutes will be approved and placed in the record. Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I was asking for October, and I will abstain on the record for that.
Certainly, if you want to put on the record that you are not participating in the approval of those minutes. Thank you. All right, let's go to, I do want to recognize, what was the gentleman's name, Stephanie, that had sent us an email regarding our notice and other provisions of this meeting?
Les Ruark
All
emailed us this morning.
Mr. Ruark's email will be placed in the record with respect to this meeting and shared with all members of the council. It's not an item of business for this meeting, so we won't be taking it up. We have no business today that requires a public hearing on any matter. As such, I'm going to give any member of the public who's present in person or by phone the opportunity to address the council on a matter not on the agenda for up to 2 minutes. Would anyone like to take that opportunity? All right, hearing none. Thank you. We'll recognize Senator Thatcher, an ex officio member of the council who's just joined us. Thank you, Senator Thatcher. We'll go next. I asked the acting Public Records Advocate, Todd Albert, to just provide us a report on what has happened with the office since Ginger's departure and how the office is being, the work of the office is being continued. If you'd like to just take a few minutes, Mr. Albert.
Sure. Where would you like me, Deputy Secretary?
Just right there would be fine.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So a lot of what I'm going to touch on today, I coincidentally emailed Brock about yesterday in relation to our website going live, so I'll just run through that again pretty quickly today. And I have an additional item at the end I'd like to briefly discuss because it relates to the PRAX business today. And please feel free to interrupt me at any point with questions. So I was contacted recently by staff of Senator Riley, who would like me to testify before the Senate General Government and Emergency Preparedness Committee on November 18th regarding the PRAX survey. So I intend to do so. I expect my testimony to run 5 to 10 minutes with questions from the committee. They also asked that I introduce myself as part of that testimony, so I will do so in my capacity as acting advocate. Next, the Public Records Advocate's website is now live. This was part of an effort begun by Ginger and I many months ago to just establish the office's administrative independence And so while we are endlessly grateful to Secretary of State and especially archive staff for providing us with all kinds of administrative and technical resources, we thought it was important that the office have its own standalone website that demonstrated, well, to make it easier to understand, essentially we'd have to explain who we were and then start attempting the mediation process. And that often complicated matters, and it's easier to make it clear from the start what our office was and what it did. So we have, or Ginger and I had, and I now have our own business cards and employee badges that say Office of the Public Records Advocate. And our website, while the content is the same, is also now branded as the Office of the Public Records Advocate, including a new logo and other items on the website that just establish us as our own office. I encourage you to look at the website, and of course, it includes the landing page for the PRAC as well. Okay. Next up, we are up to approximately 270 individual requests for assistance. That represents about 18 to 20 more since Ginger's departure. And we do continue to get requests for assistance from members of the public, members of the media, and government employees for individual one-off dispute mediations, but also policy reviews and issues like that as well. I provided background information for reporters working on public records matters and things of that nature. Let's see,
Can I ask a question? So you have had how many requests, and can you give us a sense for how many of those requests for assistance have been dispensed with and how many are still pending?
Sure.
Can you give us a sense for sort of what your workload is like?
Absolutely. And let's see, I currently have 11 requests for assistance open that I'm working on. Everything else is closed, so I guess we cleared 259 as of this moment. Who knows what's waiting for me to get back to my desk.
So in the future, I think that would be helpful for us to understand how many cases are opening or still open and pending, just as a matter of helping us understand what, if any, backlog there is. I would hate for us to have a big backlog of requests for that, with the understanding that the intent of what we passed back in, 2017, in trying to get expeditious information to the public. I would hate to see us having a big backlog, so that information might be helpful for us in your future reporting or the eventual advocate once that person is hired. So thank you for that. That's helpful.
Sure, no, that makes sense, Mark. And thankfully, just about everyone who has contacted our office is aware of the situation and has been fairly patient with me as I attempt to get to their requests. I have no choice but to triage them as they come in at this point, but I am trying to get to all of them as soon as possible. But certainly some are more time intensive than others.
Got it. How many of these are formal requests? How often are you going into formal mediation, and how many of them are resolved in informal manner?
As of yet, nothing has entered into formal mediation.
Okay.
Yeah. And the way we read formal, or the way we read formal mediation, the way I read is to go into the actual process of parties submitting materials ahead of time, enacting all the rules permitted in the statute around that, and sitting down with the parties together and attempting to mediate the dispute, whereas in every situation that has arisen so far, it's essentially me doing telephone diplomacy back and forth between the parties, attempting to reach a sort of useful resolution, or simply explaining the law to one side or the other about why what has transpired is permitted under the law, which they seem to accept as satisfactory, and then don't pursue the complaint further.
Actually, I think that's good. I think going to formal mediation is probably the last step on that continuum.
I would agree. And
I think that's excellent.
Well, yeah, no, it's worked very well so far, thankfully. And in fact, talking to counterparts in other states who do similar work, even those that have been around longer, have kind of more of a formal process and greater enforcement capabilities, have almost never gone to formal mediation. They view it kind of the same light that you do. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to trainings. I provided 2 trainings to regional governments since August, and those were very well attended with a lot of thoughtful questions about, and these are the public records officers for local governments. And some of them had attended prior trainings and came back to re-up their knowledge, or had their colleagues or whomever attend because they needed this information as well. We're getting a lot of good traction with those. I presented along with Andy Foltz at the Attorney General's Public Law Conference, essentially a Public Records 101 for government employees who were working on public records issues. Most of that audience, which ran to over 100 people, were fairly new to working on public records matters, so it's nice to reach, I'm assuming, primarily state employees who will start dealing with these issues after the conference.
Todd,
Yes.
has your question came up at my agency, has your office considered doing any online training?
Yes, and it's my intention, if I can, while acting or later as either advocate or deputy, if the advocate is so inclined to do so, perhaps put a cartoon on our website. And the reason I'm saying cartoon is I attended a National Ombudsman Conference in September where several agencies had, and not public records ombudsman, but other ombudsman agencies had put these kind of like how-to cartoons on their websites. They were cheaper to produce. They kind of stood the test of time a little longer and walked people through the particular issues they were attempting to highlight. So one idea I had was something along the lines of, what about a 10-minute cartoon about how to make a public records request, and then a second 10-minute cartoon, which would be the flip side, the government employee fulfilling that request, to try to educate all stakeholders in that process about what goes into a public records request on both sides. But I would like, now that we have the new website, I would like to add content to it along those lines, but it hasn't gotten past the thought stage at this point, and any ideas would be welcome. Doing a public law, records law overview for the Special Districts of Oregon annual conference in February, and I'm doing a public records roundup at the OCDLA, Oregon Criminal Defense Lawyers Association conference in December 6th. As I mentioned in my email, that'll be essentially a training for the public, because these are criminal defense attorneys who make public records requests rather than government employees who process them. This will in fact be my first training for the public. The slides were already submitted for that because they were due earlier this month. And I'm just going to continue working with archive staff as we move into the winter to talk about upcoming potential regional trainings and how we could tag along. Best use office resources and continue responding to requests for trainings as they come in. And then, so really that's kind of it about what I wanted to cover, other than I just wanted to briefly detail the process that has gone into my being formally appointed as the acting public records advocate, simply because this intersects the issues of office operations that you're asking to talk about, and hiring, which you're obviously dealing with here, in that because there's no clear plan of succession for when the advocate vacates the position and our office is so young and so small, while I'm deeply grateful to all parties who work together, including the governor's office, DAS, and Secretary of State's office, especially Deputy Secretary Vial, to get me formally appointed. It was a process that had to be invented as it went along, often led to just uncertainty for everyone. It was very difficult to kind of figure out what were the needed steps to just make sure there was an acting advocate to keep the office moving forward. And so as the PRAC proceeds, either through the hiring process or afterwards, I would recommend considering perhaps even amending the bill that has been discussed to add a clear line of succession in the case of a future vacancy. And language that I found very helpful was SB 605 from the last legislative session, 2019. That was an attempt to create a state ombudsman in the legislature. It had very detailed language about a deputy's role and the deputy automatically becoming the acting advocate or the acting state ombudsman upon the ombudsman's departure for any reason. And I just think that could be useful language that might help the practice work going forward.
Mr. Chair. Yes. Todd, would that be your recommended course for fixing this problem?
Well, I think it would offer the most obvious and easiest solution so that the council, the governor's office, or whomever were in charge of this process wouldn't have to figure it out every time.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chair, have we actually formally asked legislative council, or has legislative council been requested to draw up the independence bill?
Let me say that I want to reinforce what Mr. Albert just talked about in terms of the difficulty of trying to manage this situation after Ginger's departure. It was only last week that we finally got it all done. I think that's a good segue, and I'm going to let Senator Thatcher, if you don't mind, just answer Mark's question about where we are in that legislative process.
Well, I did get confirmation from Senator Riley this morning that he is still willing to put forward the concepts that we put together and agreed to as, the committee or council. And he just says, as long as we have more than 3 or more votes, we'll get a hearing.
Right.
Or,
You sort of see where I'm going, I think.
Absolutely.
I would look to the chair, Deputy Secretary Weil. Is that a solution, perhaps statutorily allowing for a succession of the deputy to become that individual in the event of an unforeseen resignation or what have you?
I believe it is something that we should consider adding to the proposed legislation that hopefully will be introduced through the committee. Unfortunately, it's not something we can act on today. Our meeting is limited to just the filling the vacancy, but certainly for the record, I think that's something, and that may drive at the end of this meeting a discussion of how soon we have a subsequent meeting to approve perhaps changes to that legislative proposal. Mr. Bullock, did you have something?
I would just add that prior to Ginger leaving, she and I worked with the committee administrator, Senator Riley's committee administrator, to get the LC draft to legislative council with the specific instructions adopted by council. So that was delivered to LC. We should get an LC draft back. It won't deal with this issue, but I think there's a pretty easy one-liner way to deal with this issue. But it probably would need to be the PRAC that actually did the appointment for acting, because theoretically, if we have our way, there won't be just one deputy at some point. There'll be a public records advocate and multiple deputies, and we should just simply empower the PRAC to appoint an acting until they hire a permanent, which I think is just a one-liner in the bill.
And from my perspective, I think it achieves the same outcome.
Same outcome. If the bill passes, of course, the PRAC would be the direct hire authority for the public records advocate, so that'd be easy to do as a one-liner. And I agree with the deputy secretary. We can't legally add that to the agenda today, but how about I draft it up, I bring it back, you all look at it.
And I just humbly ask that we make this an agenda item for the next meeting so that we can perhaps formally request that to be included, or is that unnecessary?
I'm going to defer, I think, to Senator Thatcher and perhaps Representative Howard as they get us closer to the session as to what our timing on that might need to be.
Yeah, I just don't want to lose sight of that because I do think it's important, and it took quite some time for you guys, a couple triple bank shots, to figure that one out, and so it'd be nice to get that fixed up and cleaned up.
All right, thank you, Mark. Does anyone on the telephone have any further questions of Mr. Albert? Thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us, and we appreciate your professional work and continuing the work of the office.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go next to discussion of the steps for hiring the advocate. You have in front of you several, or you have previously delivered several items that Stephanie of our office was kind enough to pull together for us. It includes the notice that was done last time when we were hiring the public records advocate. I believe that was prepared by our HR department. And what I'd like to do is invite Tasha Peterson, who is the Human Resources Director for the Secretary of State's office, to the table. And I've asked her to assist us in today's conversation about how we should move forward. We have the statute that gives us, yes.
Mr. Chair, this is Michael Crone. I just want to let everyone know that I am here and have been here. Now that I've figured out how to unmute myself from GoToMeeting, I can participate more. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. We'll note that Mr. Crone from the Attorney General's office has joined us by telephone as well.
I think that Steve Suo has also joined. Steve, are you there? He may be having mute problems.
Unmuting is a real challenge.
Yes.
I'm going to put a question mark, but make a note that we think Steve's on the phone.
Okay, excellent.
All right. So we have the last notice that we did. We have a draft appendage or amendment to that notice that would, in our view, perhaps bring it up to date. And I think that is all we have. I'd like to ask Tasha to just give us a brief overview of what kind of process we would typically go through in filling this position.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. So in terms of filling this position, I understand that you filled it last time a little bit differently than a process that we would normally follow. But I can describe a process that we would normally follow to fill a position, which is some of the things have already happened. So we review the position description to make sure it still reflects the work that we expect this person to still be performing. Then we would draft or develop our announcement, which is like has been proposed here. And this is where we would describe to our audience what it is that they will be doing. And it should include things like any minimum and special requirements of the position and any desired competencies or attributes that we like to see, what is needed to apply. So if we're looking for probably a resume, and if you want some sort of work sample included or a letter of interest, we would include that kind of information here. I would recommend requiring something beyond just a resume. Of course, that's up to you. This body gets to decide that. But and then let's see. Also recommend publishing the interview date in the announcement itself, and any other interview information. So the style in which you intend to conduct the interview is really helpful for the audience, our candidates who would be looking at this, and especially since you are very likely drawing from an audience all across the U.S., and so it's helpful in the planning to know exactly when they would be expected to be interviewing for the role and where and how the interviews might happen. Also, what style we might be using. So if we're going to continue to use like a panel style that was used last time, it's good to include that information for them. There's also some required information that will go into this, like veterans preference and how and when that's applied, ADA information, so folks needing any kind of accommodation to participate in the process would have that notice. And then I would also recommend having one point of contact for folks that have questions. I don't know if that's Stephanie or somebody else, but somebody who could speak to and answer questions about the role in particular would be helpful to include in the recruitment. And then next we would want to determine the recruitment length. So we do a minimum of a 2-week posting, but certainly given the time of year that it is, the holidays and things, we typically would recommend that you keep it open a little bit longer than 2 weeks, especially this time of year with the holidays. And then some sort of determining what the outreach strategy will be and who would conduct that outreach, who's best suited to identify the various outlets that we might want to share this in so that we get the best possible exposure on the recruitment. Developing an evaluation criteria and methodology is going to be really important, and you have to do that for each step of the process. From evaluating the applications when they first come in, or the resumes, and who you might move forward to an interview process, we have to have that determine what is the criteria and what is the methodology, and then that has to be determined in advance, and then for subsequent pieces of the process, if you're going to do an interview beyond that, what is the methodology and criteria? So determining that at the onset is very important to keep the process defensible, and not determining kind of mid-course or as you receive applicants. And then, kind of thinking through what's going to be the best way to evaluate the candidates. Last time there was a forced ranking used. That may or may not be the best approach, so just keep in mind that in forced ranking, and certainly with that veterans preference, so veterans preference for a disabled vet, they receive 10 points, and a non-disabled vet is 5 points. If you're using forced ranking and you have first, second, third. The 10-point bet would go from third to first, if they were sitting in the third spot. So there's not sometimes the end results don't reflect really how the process went or the information you received during the process. So you just want to keep that in mind if you're going to use a forced ranking. And you could have somebody that's not in your top 3, if you're spending 3 names for it, that ends up in your top 3, if that makes sense. So there's a variety of methods you can use, but you'd want to select those in advance and not wait until you have your candidates to decide. Let's see, and then determining who the groups are going to be, so who's available probably is what will make sense for this group, but making sure that those who are available, that group stays intact for each piece of the process. So if you're only, for example, if you're only able to be present for 2 of 5 interviews, that's not going to work. You have to be present for the entire components of that process. You'll want to develop interview questions. Interviewers will want to declare any conflict of interest, which could be actual or potential. Interviewers are not able to use their personal knowledge of a candidate in order to unfairly influence the outcome of the process, of course. So this can happen even really innocently sometimes, when you might have knowledge of somebody who's in the pool, and you could be having a conversation like, hey, you know, I didn't choose this person because like training is really important maybe in this role, or outreach, and I didn't see that they had it. And someone else might be sitting here and know that person and say, hey, you know what, I know them and I know that they do that in their job, and they didn't do a good job of explaining it here, but I know they do it. That would be inappropriate, because you're using your personal knowledge of that person and what they do to advocate for them in the process. So you have to be careful, mindful about doing that. And then we would recommend not picking like an arbitrary number before you evaluate the actual applicant, but rather keep strong criteria and then kind of let the outcome of reviewing the candidates against that criteria determine how many people you actually talk to, versus saying we're only going to pick 5 before you've ever gotten any candidates. Also, I would highly recommend providing questions to the candidates in advance if you can, so it allows people who need extra time or process inside their heads up here to have the time they need to be thoughtful and give you the best possible responses. But you'll want to think through those mechanics.
Yeah, these are the questions
that were asked last time.
Yep, yeah, good. That's actually one of the questions I had, knowing thankfully that we have archives. I suspect we have a lot of this material from our last go around.
Yeah, it's all retained.
Yeah.
So.
That was part of my email attachment,
Yeah.
and it's on our on the website now too.
Good.
So then the other thing just to be thoughtful about is you move through the process itself when you actually get to the interviews. Thinking about, well, for one, you have to ensure that it's fair, so you have to make sure you have to have a mechanism to ensure that each candidate is not is not advantaged or disadvantaged in the process. So, for instance, each candidate has to have the same amount of opportunity and time to view the questions in advance and to know what the questions are, or information related to the process. So you want to be thoughtful about how you do the process so that there's an ability to stay defensible and not inadvertently advantage or disadvantage one of the candidates. Let's see. Another thing to think about is if you're going to require in-person interviews, or if you're going to allow phone interviews, or if you're going to go simply to a phone interview and not do any in-person interviews. That's a decision you have to make, or Skype or some other electronic format. Yep.
Okay, so here's, I guess, my question. Do human resource professionals, if you're conducting interviews, some are able to be there in person, some are only there to be telephonically, is that considered to be unfair?
As long as everybody's offered the opportunity to appear in person, it's not considered unfair.
Okay.
However, I will tell you that research shows that there's a bias towards in-person interviews. So something to keep in mind to, kind of guard against that.
Well, the only reason I asked that, quite honestly, is that there may be some people who, we discussed this last time about whether or not people can actually afford to, take a trip out.
You interviewed Ginger by Skype.
Right.
So, I mean, but she had the opportunity to be here in person if she
Indeed.
wanted.
I just wanted to be sure that we continue to have that ability and that it doesn't create a problem in the process.
As long as everyone has the opportunity to travel
Then
with
we're
a
good
choice,
to go.
you're good.
From my perspective, my key question of you would be, now that you've seen what we did in the past, I, of course, would tweak a few things, but I was generally pretty pleased with it. What would you change? I mean, you went through the process, which is great. I'm very familiar with it. I think most people are to some extent, but I'd be interested in what would you say if you could unwind a year and a half and say, oh, don't do that, do this instead.
I would not do a public forum to interview a candidate.
Executive session?
Yes,
We debated that.
yes. There's a lot of risk that's introduced by doing that publicly, and there's things, so for one thing, you cannot ensure a fair process because you cannot control when people are getting that information related to the questions. So even though we asked people not to listen in, they still have the ability to, and there was nothing we could do to reasonably ensure that was controlled. So that's problematic. That creates risk.
Executive session. Okay.
And then along with that, there's other things that can come into play. So things around like ADA, for instance. If someone came forward and asked for some sort of accommodation in the process, we have a responsibility to keep that confidential.
Right.
And in a public process, depending on what the request and the accommodation was or what the disability was, it could be difficult to keep that confidential. So there's exposure there. The other thing was that there were at least 3 candidates that provided protected information in the process. And so I would encourage the group to make sure that there's an affirmative response when someone does that, to say,
When they start
thank
flattering
you,
on things.
that's not something we're going to consider in our decision making, right? So, I mean, it's the benefit of being able to listen back, right? What would you do different? But I would strongly recommend considering an executive session for the interview process.
I support that, actually. It's just, when we were first doing this, it was really hard for us to say, well, why shouldn't the public just all be invited? Why should we be massively transparent, since we're talking about transparency? And I get that, but holding interviews in a public meeting is just weird.
The privacy piece too, I'll tell you that could deter some folks from even applying, because there's a different kind of mindset around that in some types of employment settings where you don't tell anybody until you have a job offer, because you could lose your job just for applying. I mean, you're not supposed to, but that does happen. So that can be kind of a chilling effect. And then there are people who are in certain circumstances that need to have their identity protected, and it's difficult to provide them that kind of protection. We're doing it this way. So there could be a lot of risk to the state and to individuals participating in the process.
So then here's my follow-up question for you then. So I'm only asking because this Friday, we're actually interviewing the executive director at AOC. We have a special selection committee doing that of 9 people because I didn't want 41 board members interviewing people. And we're doing it all in executive session, but of course, as you know, you have to notice that, you have to notice it correctly. Will the Secretary of State's office be able to assist in making sure if we choose to go executive session, which I will support, that we notice it correctly? I'm happy to help, but I think this is a state DOJ, SOS thing that they're going to want to do their own way, I'm assuming.
I'm not uncomfortable at all with taking that responsibility on at the Secretary of State's office.
Perfect. Well, assuming.
Tony,
Yes?
Tony,
oh, sorry. Hi, this is Tony. I have a question.
Sure.
Kind of going along with what was just being said. I remember when I was a reporter, when there was an executive session, reporters at Multnomah County were allowed to go into the executive session. Would that be a possibility?
Well, of course, I'll defer to the Secretary of State and DOJ. But at the executive sessions that we are conducting this Friday, the media would have the right to be there. They would get warned that they can't report on what's being said,
Right.
the usual executive session thing. But my read of Oregon law currently would mean the media, the disinterested media, let's just say we had a reporter that was an applicant, we could preclude that person. But barring something like that, the media would have a right to attend.
I believe that's correct. Okay, any other questions for Tasha before we go on?
Well, I guess this is more, not necessarily for Tasha, but, we're gonna obviously have to get the solicitation out, so on and so forth. When, I guess it is a question for Tasha, when should we have, our, process, put in place? Obviously, you're saying, forget that done, all that stuff early, go ahead.
I would agree. This is a kind of a penultimate question as it relates to this process, partly because of the upcoming legislative session.
Mm-hmm.
If I were an applicant, I guess I would be very interested to know whether or not the legislative changes were going to be successful. And of course, we won't know that for sure until maybe we're well into the session or even the session's over.
Right.
We could probably get some idea about support for that from the members of the legislature as well as the governors and the governor's staff before the session. But especially with the fact that we've got the holidays coming up, and given the fact that Todd seems to be able to handle the business of the PrAC right now, I'm inclined to say, let's give Stephanie of the archives and Tasha of our HR department at the Secretary of State's office some time here, a few weeks, to develop a process, and that process maybe shows us a path that gets us close to a decision maybe in January when we're at least close enough to session to have a feeling for where we want to go.
Okay. I have no preconceived ideas.
I guess then I'm thinking too much. So my question would be on this draft notice, we have, according to current law, appropriately said, you know, we have to deliver a panel of 3 names to the governor's office for her to make a selection from. If the draft legislation passes, that's no longer true. The hiring authority would be the PrAC. Is there a way to genericize the notice such that we cover all? I don't want us to be accused of misleading people because the legislature has changed the process midstream. I want us to be, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
does that make sense?
sure.
I don't know if we can genericize these things to cover all possibilities.
Well, that's something that we've talked about and I've thought a bit about. I think we can, it is clumsy, I will admit that, but I think we can say, here's our anticipated time frame, and it may mean that we have made a decision before the legislature has concluded their work. However, if not, then the 3 finalists would be vetted and a finalist chosen by the PrAC rather than the governor.
Right.
I think we can do that without making it too
Weird.
obtuse. Yeah. So my feeling is that today,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair,
yes,
I hope is not a stupid question. But if the bill passes with the new hiring process in, I mean, I guess you would grandfather, you'd have to write into the bill that position, the current applicant would be grandfathered in for the rest of their term.
And
Or would you have to go through and rehire under the new criteria?
oddly enough, I thought about that issue coming up, so I had the instructions crafted in a way to LC to craft the transitional provisions to make sure that the new statutes applied retroactively to cover anybody in the system.
Okay.
So I didn't write that, but that was the instruction sent to LC, so hopefully
We'll have to watch that real
draft
close.
will be there, so we cover it legislatively as well, but this is, but I think we need to.
remind me, maybe Kim, you know, or Rob, maybe you know, whether the new process as proposed would still require Senate confirmation?
No,
It does not, okay.
because it's not a gubernatorial appointment.
Right, right.
It'd be much like the executive director of OLCC or the ethics commission. They're not Senate confirmed either. So.
Okay, so those requirements would then just simply disappear, and our authority would become absolute.
And that's part of what needs to be genericized, because I know there was Senate confirmation somewhere in here. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Are you comfortable, Tasha, with us kind of punting to you and with Stephanie's help, crafting some language in that respect? Okay. We have on today's agenda just A through F, kind of the things that we need to think about or talk about, but at this point, I'm inclined to simply go to a next meeting relatively soon, sometime in mid-December, and take a report back from Tasha and Stephanie, with some materials distributed prior to that meeting that can kind of give us some alternatives and make a decision then on how the process will flow from here.
That makes perfect sense to me for what I'm on.
I'm absolutely fine with that as well.
Okay?
I'm cool with it.
All right, well, that makes this meeting a very easy meeting.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Just curious, what are the chances, since we have some vacancies on the PRAC, that they will be able to participate with the new selection?
We know we have at least one appointment to the PRAC that's already been made by the governor.
Harris.
Yes, Emily Harris, which is the representative of the news media who's in good standing of a professional journalism association. And so she will be joining us, I believe, within a few days, actually. Her appointment will be finalized.
It's next week.
Is it? Okay. All right.
I don't know if can you guys hear me, but I'm on the phone. It's Emily. I've been just listening in.
Thank you for listening and participating, Emily. We all look forward to working with you.
Same here.
All right. Yeah, I think the point of business then is to defer adoption of a plan until the next meeting and set a date for the next meeting. So, do you want to suggest some dates, Stephanie?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Yes, is this,
Michael Crone. Yeah, thanks, Rich. So I was just looking at the public meeting statutes and the executive session requirements, and there are some interesting wrinkles that apply to this position that I just want to flag for us, because I think they mean that if we're interested in doing an executive session for interviews, at a minimum, we're going to need to do some things potentially before that. So for hiring a chief executive officer, which I think this at least sort of looks like, we have to have adopted hiring standards, criteria, and policy directives in meetings open to the public, in which the public has had the opportunity to comment on the standards, criteria, and policy directives. So I think if we want to be able to interview, then potentially we need to have done that before we have interviews in executive sessions. And then there's another provision that says you can't use executive session in the case of the filling of a vacancy on any public committee, commission, or other advisory group. And there's a little bit of a weird interplay here where the advocate is also a member of the advisory council, and I'm not quite sure how that all plays out. So I just wanted to flag those as issues that we should be thinking about sorting out for the next meeting we're planning now.
Thank you, Michael. I do agree And part of the process that I anticipate Tasha and Stephanie will help us with is having noticed up those things that you discussed that are required to be provided in advance of the meeting. And at the next meeting, I would anticipate that we would actually conduct a public hearing, or at least provide the opportunity for the public to comment on those criteria type items that you talked about.
Great, that's it for me. I'm very happy with the plan to schedule a future meeting. I just wanted to raise that as an item for it.
Thank you. Stephanie, what is your sense? Perhaps mid-December, December 18?
That's what I was looking at. Yeah, 18th is open for both of us and for the room. But it looks like we have a little flexibility that week. That week looks pretty good, honestly. Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday are pretty.
All right. If anyone has strong feelings about Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday of the week of the 16th, tentatively, we're looking at the week of, or the day of the 18th, again, beginning a meeting at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, which would be noticed at a minimum a week prior, with all proposed documents to be discussed at that meeting available online, and a call-in notice so that we have the public able to either be here in person or on the phone. Do I hear any concerns or objections to that date?
Well, I personally would prefer either the 16th or 17th, but if you can get the all members here on the 18th, that's fine as well.
Yeah, the Oregon Business Plan.
Oh, the Oregon Business Plan. Yeah, I'll be there, so maybe Tuesday.
Is there a preference between Tuesday and Wednesday other than that expressed by Mark?
I would prefer Tuesday.
We have 2 Tuesdays. Switching to Tuesdays, is there anyone who has strong feelings about not having it on Tuesday and having it on Wednesday instead?
We're looking at the 17th.
17th.
I can do either.
I prefer the 17th. The 18th is our office holiday party.
All right. Hearing no objection to the 17th, we'll schedule this next meeting for December 17th. And Stephanie and Tasha, let's try and have our notice out no later than the 9th. So have our materials prepared and submitted to the council and publicly noticed at the meeting. All right. I just wanted to make one brief comment about the layout of the room. This was my preference based on lots of years of being involved in public meetings. I try to avoid having any member of the deliberative body with their back to the audience, and that's why we did it this way. So thank you for your patience in switching things up. Does anyone have anything else before we adjourn today's meeting?
Well, I think for next time, we'll have as many materials as we can prepare between the two of us. But if folks have strong opinions about questions that they'd like to ask, I think last time Mary Beth acted as kind of the funnel, right? So if you want to use me for that, send me ideas of, I did post that announcement and my quick markup of it, but please look at those and anything else you can think of to improve. And I will receive those materials and incorporate them into our draft for your approval.
All right, since all members of the council have Stephanie's email address, given that she's been doing our notices, let's use her as the conduit to funnel material through, even if it's a question that you have of Stephanie in HR, Natasha in HR, funnel it through Stephanie. All righty? All right, anything further?
Mark, just quickly, Mr. Chair, I see that Steve Suo has provided some feedback, and before the record is closed, I'd just like to make sure that his email, it needs to be entered into the record for the minutes, that those are taken care of. So I just make that brief
Can
request.
you actually do me a favor, since you only have 2 comments? Could you just read them into the record?
That's
I actually have a legal reason for
I've got it right here if you'd like.
Yeah.
good.
Steve Sewell writes, can't be heard on the phone, so quick emailed comments that could be read aloud if needed for open meetings rules. I would tend to oppose executive session for reasons I can elaborate at our next meeting. Number 2, I think we can cover the issues of upcoming legislation for PRA in the job description. Add a section paragraph that says about the office. It would give history and potential upcoming changes. Thank you for that, Steve. I assume you can still hear us, and those 2 things will be put into the record as well as your email itself.
And Andy, do you want to, we've been receiving some chat comments from Christian Wolf, and we will also enter those into the record. Thank you, Christian Wolf.
Thank you, everyone. Is there any objection to an adjournment? Without objection, we'll be adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good job. Thank you very much. Appreciate your.
We like it. We like it.